Cliff, Drive My Car. What did you think?
So we often talk about length of film, and we both have the view that a film over 90 minutes should only be that long if it really merits it. And this was 3 hours long, this film, and for me it absolutely merited it. I was sad it was over. It was 3 hours of just pure entertainment, stimulation. I loved this film. I loved the characters. I think I love a film where you want to be with the characters more, where you really feel you're really enjoying being with the characters and you want to be with them more. And about halfway through this film, I thought, this film does remind me a bit of that film, which we discussed previously, not on the podcast, but of Happy Hour. And I thought, is it possible it's by the same guy? Because it reminds me. So I just checked back in my notes, and indeed it is the same guy. And that's a 5-hour film. And I loved that film. I think you saw some of it, but you didn't finish it. But I really loved that film. It made a big impact on me. And one of the things I'd written in my notes from watching that was that because it's based around 4 women, that I just loved these 4 women, these 4 characters. I wanted to spend time with them. So spending 5 hours with them was just a joy. And this film had that quality. I would have been happy for this film to go on beyond the 3 hours. So that's the first thing to say. I just thought this film was so interesting, the way it just so effortlessly blurred fiction and reality, and it just moved between the 2 plays that were within this film. Obviously we started with Waiting for Godot, and then we had Uncle Vanya, and then the stories which were told by his wife. So we have these kind of 3 elements of fiction, which then are intermingling with the reality, and it just the whole film almost moves effortlessly between fiction and reality. And I really, really liked that. When the text was being read in the car, it always seemed to be so relevant to what was happening in the reality. I was thinking it can't possibly say this in Uncle Vanya. I think I have read Uncle Vanya many years ago, and I was thinking it can't be so precisely relevant. But I've been back and checked just out of interest. I just had a quick flick through Uncle Vanya, and it's completely true to it. And I think it's a really interesting idea that I think that in artwork generally, an artwork can be relevant for each of us in different ways. And when you get a really good artwork, and in this case, a really meaty play, Uncle Vanya, when you engage with that, when you read it, when you watch it, I'm going to get, I can feel like it's speaking to me. And I think that's a great piece of art that is open to interpretation. It doesn't have just the interpretation that the artist intended. It's relevant to me. And I think that's what this film was playing with. And I just loved that idea. That really got me gripped. I was so, it was so interesting, the tension between some of the characters, how that then played out when they're reading the text. And so I really loved that. And it's not only about the words as well. Another thing I loved about this film was the real emphasis. I mean, the belief of Ryusuke, the director of the play, his belief that it's not only words, the literal meaning is just one aspect. And the fact that he experimented with different characters speaking different languages, and one character speaking sign language in a different language from the country where they were. And I just thought it was really a really interesting exploration of an art experiment that really works. And so I just loved it. I loved it for that. I really liked the kind of minimalist set design. The sets were all so simple and really clean. I mean, I visited Japan, and Japan is a very clean, minimalist country almost. But this film just felt so. It always the sets were just so simple, and it was fascinating as well, because we just kept getting these aerial views of roads. Whenever they were driving anywhere, we often had an aerial view of this empty freeway where they were often the only car on the freeway, and we had an aerial view of it, and there was something really compelling about that. And then we kept having film inside tunnels, and it feels like the whole driving thing, and obviously the film is called Drive My Car, is a metaphor for something. For something. But it's far bigger. It doesn't have an exact meaning. It's a multi-layered metaphor. I think it really feels important, and it really feels significant, but I can't really articulate what it is. The one thing I can say is that I had the feeling when we saw when they were inside the car listening to the audio of the play, when we had aerial shots of them driving along empty freeways or through empty tunnels, I had a strong feeling of a safe place. I think all of the main characters in this film were troubled in some way. They all had trauma. They were all troubled. And obviously the two main characters, Misaki, the driver, and Ryusuke, the director, they both were very, just understated, somber, not very lively. And, so you had the feeling that life wasn't easy for any of these characters, but that in this kind of emptiness of the roads and the tunnels, there was some kind of safety, almost healing. That was the feeling I had. And so I love the ambiguity around that. I love the fact, maybe there is a specific meaning for that. I'll be interested to hear what you think. But in terms of the acting, it made me think a lot of Bresson. I loved when he kept telling the actors to read with no emotion, that he wanted them to really just get to know the text. He didn't want them to act. He wanted them to get to know the text so well that then the text lived inside them, and that the text would engage with them rather than an emotional level, rather than them trying to think of what the right emotion should be. And I really, really liked that idea. And I loved that scene when they were outside and the two actors had this experience, which was obviously a really deep, profound experience between them. And the audience, which were the other actors, because it was a rehearsal, they couldn't even see. They had their backs to them and they were a long way away. But the director knew something had happened between the two of them, because they were really kind of living the text. And so I just loved all of that. It's just so interesting, really. I mean, I guess the general idea of this film is and in some ways this can sound like a cliche. If you described this as being the meaning of this film, about kind of art being a process by which trauma can be healed, I think this film actually wasn't cliched at all. It was a great success. You've got all these people who actually could live more in the art, could feel more in the art than they could actually in their own lives, where they were kind of semi asleep. I loved the final scene, the kind of closing scene with the where no words were said, because obviously you've got that long text, that long speech at the end from the character who was using sign language. So it was just silent, but it was so evocative, and there were no words. And although you had the words, because they did have the subtitles for the audience in the play as well, not just for us, it was about so much more than the words at that point. And I felt that that was what the whole film had been about. I felt really touched by the film. If I had two reservations, and I wouldn't criticize this film at all, I loved it, and I really enjoyed Happy Hour, and I want to see more of his work. They're the only two films I've seen. But if I was going to make 2 reservations, the first one would be that I'm always a little bit cautious myself in terms of using other people's work in my work. And this relies so much on, particularly on Uncle Vanya, that, that overall, I think it worked, but I think it makes it extremely complicated to bring in Chekhov's Uncle Vanya so much into, his work, which is so good in itself, and Uncle Vanya is so good. When you mix them together, I just think that needs to be done with great caution. In some ways, do you have to choose an established text? Would obviously the stories of his wife Oto were fictional, and would it have been better for the play to be fictional as well? I don't know. I don't think that's a problem. It worked for me. I think the biggest reservation I had, the other reservation, was when they visited Misaki's home, the two of them, and they saw the ruins of the house, where they were both showed emotions to each other. They've been really sharing intimate details of their trauma to each other, and they had this scene where they hugged and cried, and I think that almost went against the whole thesis of the film. I think the point was that it was a little bit too neat that suddenly they were able to show emotion. I think in some ways it was almost moving towards providing a kind of happy ending of, they replaced each other. He became a parent to her, and she became a daughter to him. And I just, it jarred slightly, that, because it went so much against the minimalism of the emotions that they'd expressed. But despite that minimalism, there was so much in it. So it felt like it didn't need that explicit emotion. I do appreciate that he resists, because a bit of me wanted to see what happened after the play and see him. This might sound contradictory, but it's like, you want the happy ending. You want him and Misaki to be hugging each other, and for the audience to kind of love the play and think it was the best performance ever. And I thought it was really clever the way it ended with the silence, and then we just had a few seconds of applause, which tells us that the audience liked it. But it didn't go for the cliched, really happy ending. Those reservations don't affect my enjoyment of this film at all. I think this was absolutely brilliant. I loved it. I would highly recommend it, and I would like to watch it again, and I can't wait to see more of his work.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I really loved it. We mentioned before we came on that we put another one of his films on the list, and that kind of, I thought when I recommended it, that it kind of gave away my feelings of the film. But it's not surprised that you liked it. It's probably, I doubt you're surprised that I am too. You're right that what's funny is I'm glad you went first, because I realized, although it's 3 hours long, when I looked at my notes at the end of it, I realized I'd basically just made a short list of things I really liked. And there isn't much sort of analysis of the film here. But, haven't we, spoken quite a few times about brevity and how great it is to see a film be really concise. But I suppose the point is, a work of art that works is as long as it needs to be. And the skill is recognizing what that length is. And with Drive My Car, 180 minutes is about as long as it needs to be. It feels just perfect. And like you, I enjoyed every minute of it. It's a really joyful film. Though it really has that kind of melancholy mysteriousness of Murakami. I thought it captured the tone and feel of Murakami's fiction beautifully. It's beautifully structured as well. And the way, as you say, Uncle Vanya comes into the film's text at key moments and just chimes with it so poetically is really lovely and very skillfully done. And I actually really like the idea of working with pre-existing texts. I've been working with Crime and Punishment myself, and I actually really like the idea of, and because it speaks to me of exactly what you were saying, that when an artwork works, it stops becoming this like monolithic art object like Uncle Vanya, and it becomes mine. Crime and Punishment isn't this like really famous Russian novel. It's mine. It belongs to me. And so I can by working with it, I'm making my own thing. And I got the sense that there is an equal feeling of like really joyful ownership in this film. Like the filmmaker and the writer, they own Uncle Vanya when they make this film, because it belongs in this text, So I really liked it. I was really swept up by it right from the beginning. It has the first sort of act has some really interesting time shifts that happen really swiftly. And as that happens, the psychological layers of the story subtly complicate. And before you know it, you're kind of swept up. And then it settles down a little bit and spends quite a long time with those characters and the rehearsals. And the storytelling within the story, as you said, is really well done. Both the story Otto starts to tell him, and then we get the second half of it much later on when the actor tells him the rest in the cab. And it's strange and beguiling and compelling, and it's proper writing. It feels it's very much fiction. Like you feel like you're being told a piece of literary fiction, and it has all the kind of weight and satisfying. It's just really beautifully done. And that, I think all the characters actually I found very satisfying, but they are no doubt very literary. You've got the grieving artist, the young girl who's still, conflicted about the death of her mother, the disgraced actor. They have very carefully done, but literary backstories. And so there's almost something quite mannered about the way they're plaited together. But it's done so skillfully that it's just a joy, in the same way that a well-written piece of literary fiction can be lovely. I really liked the bit leading up to the hometown. You're right that it kind of has its cake and eats it a little bit, because there is that lovely heartbreaking exchange in the car where he says, "If I were your father, I'd tell you it wasn't your fault." And she says, "And if I were your wife," and he says, "But we can't. And so I killed my wife and you killed your mother." And you feel like that's where it's going to end. But as you say, it isn't. They get to the hometown, they have the reconciliation, they hug, they cry. But by that point in the film, I felt like it had earned it. And I was actually really moved by it. When it got to the ending with Uncle Vanya, the final act on stage, and she performs it in sign language, I just found that intensely moving. Just almost overpoweringly moving. And it was a beautiful way of kind of doubling the point, because it's very moving in the play, and then it becomes doubly so when it has even more impact within the context of the film in which it occurs. And it's a really great example of how you can take like a canonical text and make it new. And so the way she performs it, the way it's done without words, it just really brings it to life and makes it something completely new. And I found it extraordinarily moving, and I loved it, every minute of it. Fantastic film, really good fun.
That bit where he finishes, they're sitting in the bar and the young guy says, there's more to that story. I just thought that was gripping, because it's like you really felt how the intrigue for Ryusuke at that moment of kind of that his wife had, there was more to this story. I mean, you were just hanging on every word. I just thought that was so brilliantly done. And I agree about the play at the end. You know, we've reviewed in the past year a few, you know, plays within the film and films within the film, and some we've really liked and some we've not liked. And you know, it doesn't necessarily work, but in this case it really worked. And yeah, that ending is extraordinary with the silence as well. You know, I agree, it was just breathtaking. I thought every time we saw a bit of the plays, like the Waiting for Godot extract, and when we saw, I think we saw Uncle Vanya twice, it just seemed like it was a great production. I mean, I would really love to see those productions of it. I think that was really, really good. But yeah, so we both absolutely loved it.
Yeah, definitely. No criticisms of it at all. And you know, there were a couple of touches, like there's almost sort of an ending there, isn't there? Because there is the moment on stage where the stage goes dark and you can see the candle, and then there's an eruption of applause. And perhaps that's the more sort of classical ending, the more obvious ending point. But it doesn't end there. It ends with her in the car and she has the dog. But I think actually there's something quite lovely about the fact that it defies that expectation. It doesn't go for the more severe kind of classical ending. It allows us something more generous and hopeful with her. And I liked it. I think it kind of earned it, all told.
Yes, I mean, I have mixed feelings, because, you know, I love a happy ending. So there's a bit of me that absolutely wanted to see it all nicely wrapped up at the end. But from viewing this as an artwork rather than just an entertaining film, I really loved the ambiguous ending. And I think you're right that he kind of tried to play it both ways. And I do wonder, because this actually won the Oscar, didn't it, for Best International Feature? It says that in the movie description. I wonder if it needed something, it needed a nod towards a happy ending for it to be in contention for an Oscar, because I think Happy Hour at 5 hours, and I mean, it's kind of full of ambiguity and themes, and I don't think that was ever going to win an Oscar for, you know, Best International Feature. So I do wonder whether he had an Oscar in mind by putting that in, because I think the more purist kind of sterner ending actually was more dramatic than kind of feeding that need for a happy ending. But I've no complaints. As you said, it earned it. It could do whatever it liked, and I was still going to say, wow, what a great film.
Yeah, maybe he was fishing for an Oscar, I don't know. Yeah, hard to say.
So what are we doing next?
Next up is Great Freedom by Sebastian Mise.
Looking forward to it.